ZOV 53, Chapter 2. First, I was taken to the city of Sevastopol, to the Orion Hospital. Uh, our Pav, which I mentioned above, arrived there at 1 o'clock in the morning. Before that, there was a stop somewhere in Krasny Perikop, where a medical tent camp was set up on the territory of a civilian hospital, where we were met by a medical detachment from Buyansk. It mainly consisted of Dagestani women who greeted us with warmth. We unloaded like wildlings from the Pazik. We were immediately surrounded by military doctors from Buyansk. We were wild because there was no shooting around, silence, and other people. A feeling of calm and security appeared. This is an indescribable feeling. Doctors began to quickly find out who needed a dressing, painkillers, or other help, while seeing off to a cozy tent where a dining room was organized. At the moment, it seemed to me a corner of paradise. There we were fed with some tasty stew and barley soup. It was impossibly tasty at that time. I felt care and compassion from these women. It was a very strange and already forgotten feeling. A very strange feeling due to the fact that until that moment it seemed to us that something was happening everywhere. Everyone tightened their belts everywhere, such as everything for the front, everything for victory, as it was during the Second World War. But then it became finally clear that everyday life is everywhere. People work, rest, hang out in clubs, and the internet is not blocked. Do not be surprised. For the first 2 months, we had practically no connection with the outside world, and we lived in our own little world. In a war where, in addition to the inhuman conditions of lack of food, water, sleep, warm clothes, and normal human life, we experienced an information hunger when you feed on rumors from a driver who went to the rear for dry rations and heard that the internet was blocked. That planes don't fly to Crimea, the price of sugar has jumped 10 times, and the dollar has exceeded 120 rubli. Being in the isolation of hostilities, you cannot assess the picture objectively and start thinking for yourself. It was because of this that I began to interrogate these women about what was happening in the world and what they write in the news. I remember that they seemed upset to me, but they tried not to show it, perhaps due to the fact that several such buses pass through them a day because of a ribbon like ours, and they understand that the special operation is not going according to plan. Or was there such a plan to begin with? Perhaps due to the fact that they themselves do not understand why this is at all. I remember one of them began to tell me that celebrities and traders are pouring out of the country. She was joyful as she said it. While for some reason she happily spoke about the fact that Sobchak, that is Ksenia Sobchak, was arrested, which surprised me then. She was still a former presidential candidate. But then, as expected, it turned out that this was not the case, like many other rumors. After a half-hour stop there, when we were fed and bandaged and anesthetized the wounded, we were taken further to Sevastopol, as mentioned above, to the Orion Hospital, having arrived there at 1 o'clock in the morning. We wandered around and shouted in the yard for another half an hour because no one met us stupidly. The guys who were already lying there, mostly our colleagues from the airborne forces, were from the 11th Airborne Brigade, as we called them, the Fighting Buryats, warmly welcomed us, helped us unload, and peppered us with questions about progress on the front, since there were few successes. We still stood on the line of demarcation between Kherson and Nikolaev regions. The artillery of the armed forces of Ukraine fired at our positions. Ours hammered at them, and between them we were waiting for reinforcements for a counteroffensive. Half an hour later, a woman dressed in a mixture of military and medical clothes came out, took us to the waiting room, and they began to triage and change us into pajamas and gowns. All the wounded were immediately sent for operations. My condition was exhausted, and all I thought about then was that I want to lie down and fall asleep faster. It felt like I was hit by a train. Everything hurt wildly. I couldn't explain exactly. My back and legs hurt, in addition to problems with my eyes. When they finally got it, they took me to the ward where the nurse gave me some kind of mixture and a pill saying it was to sleep better. I was very surprised that the hospital was very modern and new. The wards were 2-bed. The ward had a shower, toilet, air conditioning, and there was a second exit to the street directly from the ward. It was fresh, quiet, and comfortable. After the trenches, it seemed to me that it was better than the hotels like Radisson or Hilton. In the war, I dreamed of a shower, but at that moment, despite the fact that my hands were black from stubborn dirt, I didn't find the strength to shower. I just lay down on the bed and fell asleep after sleeping all this time in one position. Such bliss from the possibility of sleeping on beds with clean linen, in safety and silence, a person who has not slept on bare ground in frost and shoes, with a sense of constant danger, will never understand. While I was sleeping, my brother soldier was put in my room. We arrived together on the Pazik. His eardrum was torn in one ear. He heard only with the other ear. That's how they put us together, blind and deaf. I don't remember how long I slept. In the morning, a nurse came to take blood from a vein, and I could only open my eyes and remember that I couldn't wake up. My eyes closed and fell back asleep. But somewhere around dinner, they woke me up and took me to another old building to the optometrist. The optometrist was somewhere on the 6th floor, and it was very difficult to go up there. The pain in my body gave off with every step, and the adrenaline to help no longer stood out. So the chubby elderly nurse who accompanied me went up there faster than me. The ophthalmologist explained, "The equipment there is not bad. As it seemed to me, the doctor said, you have such a normal keratitis in both eyes with astigmatism." He also said that my vision in both eyes was minus 5.5, and began to write a conclusion for a long time, simultaneously calling and agreeing with the ophthalmological department to transfer me there. As I later found out, in this exemplary hospital, people are not kept for a long time and shoved to other cities' hospitals and sanatoriums. After that, I was escorted back to the ward where I finally went to the shower, washed myself for at least 30 minutes, rubbing the stubborn dirt under hot water. Then there was lunch. They cook very well there, literally homemade. Then I lay down again and passed out. In the evening, the doctor began to wake me up and tell me to change clothes. They took me to another hospital. I don't know why, but it was very difficult to wake up, clumsily changing into my uniform while discussing the future treatment with a friend in the ward. Literally 5 minutes later, she ran again and began irritably, indignantly, and stating, "What are you waiting for?" And I noticed that she was a major. My irritation at that moment began to go off the scale. Only in our modern army is this possible. Military doctors have their own structure and are treated in hospitals, but in fact, they oftentimes have military ranks that are quite high, and according to military regulations, they are senior in rank, which is why they often behave very arrogantly towards ordinary contract soldiers. From such military doctors, you often hear such a tone that our direct commanders and the airborne forces do not allow themselves in our country. Any self-respecting adult man will be humiliated when they talk to you in this way, and reading in her eyes that she believes that she has some kind of superiority over me because she is a major, her tone finally began to infuriate me. Those who take part in hostilities risk your life, leave your health, while this madam here further builds up fat folds, and she yells at you and tries to scold you because she is a major and you are a simple contract soldier. And even now you have a vision of So-So. Thin, overgrown, dressed in discount hospital pajamas, and you get out of bed groaning like an old grandfather because your whole body hurts. Such behavior is ubiquitous in the military medical services, and I myself have come across and heard from others that some kind of therapist or surgeon from the medical service who has the rank of captain or major, but who has not served a day in the real army, is trying to treat you, his direct duty, is trying not to treat you, which is his direct duty, but to scold. And in the case of this Madam Major, when you already feel bad, and for the whole day none of the doctors approached you and asked you how you feel, so even at night, she appears and yells irritably that you're going slowly. I think that my eyes were not very furious then, but all I could squeeze out of myself is, "You don't need to yell at me," and continue to tie the shoelaces on the berets at the same speed as before, but not specifically to annoy her, but because I simply could not go faster. Madam Major was outraged by this. It was clear from her that she was used to commanding and scolding those who came to her for treatment, and she yelled, "How are you talking to me? I'll call the military police." I got up, moved away from her, and also answered, raising my voice, "Get away from me. Call the military police." There was a portion of self-satisfaction from the fact that she was dominating someone. Madam Major left the ward, scaring me with the military police, although without any legal grounds for this. A couple of minutes later, tying my shoelaces and saying goodbye to my deaf comrade in the ward, I went out with a large trash bag on my shoulder. I didn't have a backpack. Where my camouflage coat and sneakers were. The sneakers were a gift from Stavropol Special Forces. Going out into the courtyard, I saw that the car that was waiting for was not there, i.e., there was noise that the fact that someone was tired of waiting for me were fictitious. It was raining outside, and for another 10 minutes I stood there, because I was also annoyed by this hysterical doctor with the rank of major, deciding that I would rather stand here than go back and cross paths with her again. A Waz loaf, that's a 4x4 van made by Ulyanovsk Avtozavod, so called because it's roughly shaped like a loaf of bread, rolled into the yard. I got into the car. Madam Major got out, gave the driver some of my documents, and told him not to give them to me, and we drove off. While we evacuees stood on the street for half an hour in the cold in the yard, to hell with me, but almost all were with shrapnel and bullet wounds. Some of the bandages were soaked with blood for a long time, and some were groaning from the fact that the painkillers had stopped working. Okay, when we have to endure it in the war zone, but when we are here at home, when all the social services that the state maintains for this very purpose should work, and they behave so carelessly, isn't this a threat to the country's security when someone, because of this, may not survive or remain crippled? Is not this criminal medical negligence? But as you know, the military was forbidden to disclose problems in the army. I would not want to be objective, because perhaps this woman is not a bad person and treats her work responsibly, but the fact that she overslept the arrival of a bus with the wounded is a consequence of the fact that the hospital has an acute shortage of staff and huge overtime, which are probably not paid. I heard a lot of complaints from nurses and doctors, but again I wonder if they themselves are to blame for this. After all, they, like all of us, do not complain to the labor committees, the prosecutor's office, the courts, to which it is a big problem to turn, that they have to do the work of several people, that they are not paid for overtime, that they do not have the necessary medicines and equipment. They endure, which ultimately affects the quality of their work, and as a result, the venting of anger on others. For example, the paramedic who sent me to evacuate from the front line asked me to transfer to the medical detachment that he does not have syringes and painkillers. There is not even this on the front line. If they just wanted to get rid of all of us, then there are no questions asked. But if not, then who will be responsible for the thousands of lives of Russian soldiers who followed orders and did not receive quality medical care guaranteed by law? Why maintain a medical service as a branch of the military at all? I'm not talking about field and emergency medicine. What is the problem with having independent modern hospitals for the military where the doctor will treat me and not scold me? How can you put in one status of a serviceman, of a person engaged in real military service and a person who has nothing to do with the real army? And at the same time, they're treated in military hospitals that are far from being good, but they receive all the benefits of a serviceman who are given high military ranks and who will not rot in the trenches. How do you? One of my friends who died at the airport of Nikolaevsk in the summer, he was diagnosed with an inguinal hernia in our hospital in Feodosia. He told how he was already lying on the operation table under local anesthetics and realized that he had already been cut. He heard the doctors whispering that he did not have a hernia. There are several thousands of such stories, but it is impossible to achieve the truth and punish the guilty. This is how the system of interaction between services and justice is arranged. Ordinary contractors are often not legally literate enough, and the military prosecutor's office does not provide assistance if, in their opinion, something interesting has not happened to them at the moment. Continuing the topic, I will already speak about the fact that I am generally against women in the Russian army, or let them serve as in the army of Israel or the United States, i.e., on equal footing with men, or they are not needed there at all. Only in our army, women in the vast majority serve as decorations, which are often arranged there by their husbands and lovers, not counting isolated cases of paramedics. Sometimes really trying to help someone somehow, despite small powers. I am generally silent about the civil ranks of general who are higher in rank and position than regimental commanders. I had to think of it. You really need not understand and not appreciate your army. If we continue the topic of military medicine of the Russian army, then it's enough just to compare the individual first aid kit, the IPP, of the Russian soldier and the American, now often found in the armed forces of Ukraine. In our tourniquet, bandage, and promedol, and as practice shows, not everyone on the front line has it, but looking into the American first aid kit, then immediately without experience, you won't understand what it is. The best parallel would be a comparison with a Soviet Zhiguli and a Mercedes. But we are forbidden to spread bad news about your service. Otherwise, everyone will suddenly find out that these are problems. It's easier to hide than to fix. While the driver drove me to the other end of the city, to the ophthalmology department, I smoked and tried to stop being angry. I learned from the driver that no one is kept in this new hospital for a long time, and everyone is scattered to other hospitals and sanatoriums in different cities. Paying attention to the folder handed over to Madam Major to the driver, I asked him to let me see it, let me see what it was. Opening it, I saw a certificate form where there was a listing of my health problems, indicators that were not actually carried out for me. Services that were not actually carried out for me. There were a lot of sheets and everything about my health. By the way, most of the parameters were drawn up in the album. It is written that during a special operation in Ukraine, earth got into my eyes. Perhaps due to endless paperwork and heavy workload, doctors are not up to being more attentive to treatment. What else is the explanation for this? It said that I complain of pain in my back and legs. At the bottom, a handwritten inscription in bright light green marker: behaves aggressively, violates military discipline. That's all you need to know about the Army. If you're not smart enough in front of senior officers and don't pretend to be stupid and agreeable to everything, then you will be branded, and it is practically impossible to achieve military discipline from them in relation to you legally. Because of this, some lose patience with injustice towards themselves and simply enter into open conflicts with command. which immediately means a cross on their career. Because in the current army, only Gerasimov agrees to everything is needed. The trip around the night Sevastopol is over. We enter the territory of a military hospital. There is a huge territory here, but the buildings are far from the first freshness. The legacy of our Soviet ancestors, like everything that surrounds us from another great country of the past. I was again dragged through the registries and sent to the ophthalmology department. The time was already around 2100. The body of this department is not at all the same, but it was sinful to think that those who returned from the front would be well treated. This hospital comes out like an armada tank and much more ostentatious.